Okay.
This was Levasseur Street. And then it was Kawana Street right up there.
Okay.
Patty Street bordered that, coming down from that side.
And we're on the back side of the Doubletree Hotel.
Yeah. Had
That
been all
sits here
down
now.
this property.
And new apartments here.
Properties along the corner there.
And then the Clark Fork here. And the
It
Riverwalk.
flooded a lot.
Okay.
And we used to flood a lot of these homes along
Okay,
the
come over
street
here out of the sun. There you go.
there.
And
Now
and,
these
and people are probably going to walk by, so come over here just a little bit more. Okay.
These properties were some of the very first property. In fact, it's the first addition for Missoula, the town of Missoula. And when my grandfather first came from Hungary and his best friend, they worked in an apartment right between the Wilma Theater and here. And they worked for a lady on Kawana Street that had this property, and she didn't have any kids, and they did so much work for her that she deeded the property over to them. And that's how they acquired these properties in this oldest edition in Missoula, 1908.
1908?
So, yes, 1908.
Okay.
So, and that was John Chesley and his friend Dick Genzel. And they were best friends, and Gammy ended up marrying John Chesley, my grandmother, Minnie Chesley. And they got married in 1913, maybe 1912. But they got married then in Missoula. She was a little German immigrant, and he was Hungarian. And then.
But it wasn't Germany at that time.
No, she came over here in 1908. They both were in Missoula.
Right, but and that was when they first arrived.
Yeah.
But she wasn't from Germany because it wasn't Germany at the time.
It wasn't Germany. She was German, but she was from both of them were from the German-Hungarian Empire.
Okay.
The Austria-Hungarian Empire.
There you go. Okay.
Austro-Hungarian Empire. He was born in Papa, Hungary, and she was born in Neustadt, Austria.
Where we both had been.
Yes, where we both have been to those towns, and they both had come here to Missoula.
So he comes here in 1908. He doesn't know her.
Right.
And he ends up getting deeded property. His family gets
he and
deeded.
his friend.
Get deeded property,
yes.
and then and then Minnie Chesley, they meet each other.
They meet each other here in Missoula.
In Missoula.
Yeah.
And she worked for a bank, and he was doing construction.
No, she worked for several of the sorority homes. One of the sorority homes she lived was right by Hellgate Grade School, Hellgate High School. Okay. Over there, she worked in several sorority homes as a housekeeper and kind of a nanny for the people there.
Okay.
And then she was part of the little German club and started our first English Lutheran church there. And then I don't know how she and Grandpa met, but he eventually joined the church too.
Okay.
But she had joined the church and has lots of many friends that lasted her lifetime from those earliest years in Missoula.
Okay.
And so then they married, and eventually they bought the property over on Woodford and raised the kids there. Grandpa Chesley was a baker, and he had a bakery shop called the Tip Top Lunch on Higgins Avenue, 313 Higgins Avenue.
Higgins is right behind us. There's the Higgins Bridge
street.
back. Yeah.
Yeah.
And there's the Higgins.
That's where they, shortly after he had that shop at Tip Top Cafe. In fact, when he had that shop at Tip Top Cafe, all of the guests, the Zaners, the Ostergrens, the Rogers, and the Chesleys were all here in Missoula. That's when they first showed up.
Probably all had lunch with each other at one time.
They probably had lunch at the Tip Top Cafe, because working at the railroad, they probably had lunch at his place.
So you
acquired these properties.
You were in this area as a kid,
yeah.
From the ages of.
I was probably here by the time I was
1 year old.
I was living here until I turned 6 when we moved to Willard.
And then we went to Willard.
We lived in the Helen Apartments 1 year while we were building that, but we walked from here down to the
Now, wasn't your dad involved in building some of these properties over here?
Yeah, some of those are older properties on still Levasseur, and Ronnie Jones lived right there where that white car is.
Oh yes, let's hear the Ronnie Jones story.
The Ronnie Jones story. So, Ronnie was one of our neighbors.
Ron Jones,
and his parents,
Hellgate High School track coach.
Lamar and I can't remember his mother's name, But he worked for Montana Power Company. His dad did, and Ronnie was. We played together and walked down to Kiwanis Park and pushed each other on the swings, and he said I was his first girlfriend.
At your mother's funeral, Ron Jones said that Mom was his first girlfriend, and they were in kindergarten and first grade.
And we didn't go to kindergarten.
Or first grade and second grade.
We weren't even in first grade together.
Oh,
it was before
5 and 6.
5 years old, 4
5
or 5
years
years old.
And Ron Jones.
He was in first grade.
I know Ron Jones because he was, when I was in high school, he was the track coach, and I ran against one of his athletes and went to college with one of his athletes at Montana State.
And Ronnie married a Willard friend of mine named Beverly Chapin that I was in school with at Willard School. But Ronnie's still very dear to me and to our family.
Okay.
And like he said, he told that story, and he was at my mother's funeral, so that our families had been friends since these years back in the 1940s, early 40s.
So kind of row houses like what we're seeing back in there,
This is all
basically used to be in here.
Yeah.
Row houses that went all the way across to this.
But this was Levasseur Street that went through, and 2 whole blocks of this were all removed to build this hotel.
Right here.
The Consolidated Freightways was across the street from us, across Kiwanis Street from us. And then my grandmother had the place at 223 Kiwanis, and then 246 Kiwanis that was right up on this corner. But and my grandfather and his best friend had got these properties. Well, Grandpa died when Mom was only about 9 years old, 10 years old.
This is Grandpa Chesley.
Grandpa Chesley, John Chesley. He passed away, leaving Gammy with 3 kids: Johnny, Margaret, and Helen.
Okay.
And they lived on Woodford Street at that time. So with couple years after Grandpa died, Gammy married Dick Gensel, who was John's best friend, who had bought these properties with them together. And at the time of her wedding, Dick signed those properties over to her at the wedding. And so we've got all the deeds for those and all the plats laid out where...
And then Dick Gensel ended up passing away too.
Dick Gensel lived for 1 year. He was an avid fisherman, and he went fishing one 4th of July week and had planned to be gone for the whole week fishing. And he drowned in the Blackfoot River. And so he was a painter, and all his buddies, and they had searched for 3 days. They looked for his body and looked to find him, and they finally found him in the river, off to the side of the river, with his fishing boots on and a fish still in his hand.
Oh my gosh.
That story made the headlines, the story in the Missoulian.
Oh wow.
And so there's a great story about fisherman found with fish still in his hand, and then leaving the 3 Chesley kids, Minnie Gensel, Chesley Gensel.
So your grandmother actually was kind of well off, by means of, not well off.
The properties were modest, old little homes.
Yeah.
She had enough that she could rent one house out.
Yeah.
And then there's a little house behind hers that a little old lady named Mrs. Walker lived in, little tiny house behind her on the alley. And between the other 2 properties that she rented out, that's how she raised her kids, was with the rentals from those properties.
So from 1908 to when did that happen? Dick Gensel passes away.
Dick passed away. Oh, I should know all these because I've got them all in the book. But
roughly.
Mom was, she was about 10 when her dad died, and Johnny probably was 15 or 16, and Mom maybe 13.
So 1920s, 1925-ish.
Yeah, right in that area. Dick
she inherits property, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. And so she raised those 3 kids from that, point in time on, based on that property.
Yeah.
And eventually, and then we lived in her houses. Donnie was born in the one house, 223, and then we all lived for at least 4 years. Bobby was born in the house on this corner. He was born there, and he was born but he's 4 years younger than I am, 46. 43. He was born in 48.
I'm going to slide you back in front of this sign here.
Okay.
Come over here.
So we lived there then. We had
What was all this area like right here, right along the river?
there were some houses all along this street. The street continued. There were houses all along here.
Okay.
And then these houses, the river used to flood them quite often.
Oh.
So there were stories about the flooding. I remember as a child then that a lot of these houses their basements got flooded in this river. They have slightly shored this up and got riprap and stuff.
Did you come down
there
here swimming as a kid?
No, never did.
Never?
Never on this part. We were
Oh.
just too tiny.
Oh, okay.
We didn't swim in the river here.
Okay.
I don't remember that. We used to walk. And then this house of Gammy's was pivotal. I mean, we lived here for a long time. And then she would live in either this house or the one in the middle, usually the one at 223 Kiwanis in the middle of the block. She'd live in that a lot of her life. She lived in that house.
And you say Gammy, that's Minnie Chesley.
Minnie Chesley.
Yeah.
Wilhelmina Bayer, Chesley Gensel. That's her, was her full name.
Okay.
But she took the
Say it
Chesley
again.
back. Wilhelmina Bayer was her maiden name. Chesley Gensel. Chesley. She took the Chesley back.
B-A-Y-E-R, like bearer?
She spelled it on her suitcase, B-A-Y-E-R.
B-A-Y-E-R.
In German, it's sometimes spelled B-E-I-J-E-R.
Okay.
With kind of a little umlaut sign over it. It's got about 2 or 3 different spellings.
Okay.
But on her suitcase, it was B-A-Y-E-R. That's how she had spelled that. And she shows up on working as Minnie Bayer in the university area. But she lived over here.
She came through Ellis Island?
No, that was before Ellis Island. That she came actually into Virginia with her sister. Her older sister, Elizabeth Stein, and she was married to Adam Stein. They were living in Virginia at that point, and they went back to Germany. And with the 3 children that she had, that trip over the ocean was so hard that she talked her sister and their family into letting my grandmother come back to the United States with her, thinking that she, to help her with the children on the ship. And they they were in Virginia first. They came in New York, but they were in Virginia. They came in at the other, it wasn't Ellis Island, it was another name of the immigration place that was in New York. And then they were in Virginia for a very short time, and then they moved to Missoula. And Adam had a tailoring shop in Missoula. He ran a tailoring shop, and they lived, I think I've showed you where they lived.
Okay.
They lived over on Pine Street, right against Rattlesnake Creek.
All right. So they came from Virginia pretty soon,
quickly,
right to Missoula.
She has no memories of being in Virginia.
Okay.
And then they came here to Missoula. So she and her sister, they're both here together in Missoula, and amongst the German-speaking community that was here.
Ah, okay. And that was in 1908, roughly.
Yeah, right around there. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
I've got those immigration papers and that stuff in the story. So she lived here then and quickly learned to speak English because she
About how old was she?
18 when she came over.
18. Oh, wow. And why did she leave Germany?
Because she came back to help her sister raise those children on the ship.
Oh, I see.
So she came back to help her take care of the kids on the ship, always thinking she probably would go back. And never did.
Oh.
And she and when she married John Chesley, the family she worked for over there on by Hellgate Grade School, it's now Hellgate High School, the family she worked for, he was the president of the Western Montana Bank.
Okay.
A big, rich, beautiful home. And they had no children, and they wanted to adopt her. And they wanted to marry her off to a duke in Europe. They wanted to marry her off to some royalty there, and she chose John Chesley instead. She met him, and so she married John Chesley. But
in what year do you remember?
I think I said like 1913.
Okay.
About 1913 is when they got married. I've got that in the story, all those dates in that part. But they met because Elizabeth and Adam Stein, her brother-in-law, he had this tailor shop, and the tailor shop, he had a friend that was visiting there, and they invited John Chesley over for dinner to their house on Pine Street, and that's how Gammy met. So she met him at dinner at her sister's home.
I see.
And then later they married at her sister's home. Got married
good.
there. So that was,
Okay.
it goes back for a long time. And they've been part of Missoula's history ever since. Gammy lived in Missoula almost all her life, unless she was living in Helena for a few years. Helen went to work for the state, and Gammy bought a house in Helena and lived with Helen until Helen got married. And then Gammy would be back in Missoula at her properties, and then she'd go over once in a while and stay and help Helen take care of the kids, and in East Helena, lived there with them. But
always came
Missoula
back.
was her home
Yeah.
all her life.
Huh.